So his radical perspective on HR is that HR as we know it, right, the human resource department as we know it, is not relevant anymore. And he proposes that we actually split HR into two strands or two arms. One is known as the HRA or HR administration, and they focus more on the transactional activities and specifically around compensation and benefit. Right. Separately, there is another arm called HRLO, and it stands for HR Leadership and Organization, and they specialize in supporting the organization at the strategic and more leadership level.
I mean, I think a while back we were, discussing HR operating models and such for one of the transformation clients. And I asked the business leader, I said, hey, looking at your HR department, we were talking about restructuring HR department to serve better. And I said, how would you want the HR department to be? And this is like a big multinational, and he laughed and he said, the best HR department is one that does not exist. I get some of what Ram's suggesting here, but I think there's a little more to it, like you're also saying, right? There's a little more to this because it depends on the context, it depends on the business we're talking about, right?
Well, I think it's certainly very radical, right? It's not often that you see this kind of pretty loud views on how HR should be structured across the business, right? And I think contextualizing this is important. Certainly, I think it works for a startup, a fast-moving startup that needs to deliver on its revenue or profit goals, as opposed to a more stable entity like an MNC. So in this case, perhaps it would work better for a startup because when employees demand speed of response from their service providers, internal service providers, then perhaps a multifaceted finance HR organization would better serve that need, right? As opposed to a more mature MNC where you have greater flexibility from a HR perspective to deliver on customer, employee experience, engagement for employee culture, diversity, and so on.
Yeah, the word that sort of throws me off a little bit in Ram Charan's article, very, very, very great article and a great theory, is the word split, the choice of the word split, right? Because split has a connotation that operations should not talk to L&O or LO, or the strategic part of it, right? And how do you enable a strategy without actually thinking through the operations of it, right? So there needs to be some connections anyway, and so that's one. But startup versus MNC aside, that's a maturity question, a scale question, I suppose. It also depends on the sector we're talking about, isn't it? So depending on the industry you're in. So if you're a F&B retail, right? I'm thinking fast food chains, and so the kind of workforce you have, the kind of needs you have for the future from your workforce with automation coming in, those kind of things. How much is that reskilling agenda important to you? Versus, let's say you're a high tech company, and what do you require from your HR then, right? Because what are your workforce needs, where it's an ever evolving sector, the target changes almost always, business targets change, the profile of your workforce continues to change, and so what you require from your HR also is a little bit different. And somehow I feel like surely this has to have an implication on the way you organize your HR, on the way you kind of distribute those capabilities across the organization, and the way you structure it, right? So sector is also important, I think. If we don't have good people strategies and we don't have middle management, line managers who know how to manage their people in a good way, right? Who are not living those strategies and those HR tactics, people management tactics, then we're not going to get the kind of results we're aiming for, no matter how we split the HR function department, So yeah, it's more than reporting lines. It's about embedding that HR capability across the organization, depending on the sector and the context of your business. And that's what it's all about, I think.
Basically, traditional HR departments are seen as your back office support. A couple of like Smurfs sitting behind a computer and then they're churning out payroll, your leave applications and stuff like that. But what he's trying to say essentially is that HR needs to evolve to better support the business needs. And they need to communicate, they need to work cross-functional. I think that is one of the core messages he's saying. However, his perspective or solution revolves around governance, right? HR governance. However, there's another perspective, and this is where Dave Ulrich, the famous Ulrich model that we all know. His perspective on this is that it should be more of a structure approach, HR structure.
So many times we go for these transformation projects, and it's very common for the business leaders to ask us, hey, since you're doing my HR operating model, since you're redoing it, why don't you also tell me what are the implications for HR structure, right? So first, when you're thinking of providing elevated HR services, the best employee experience possible, what have you, I think you need to understand your business context and the needs, right? And so it's 101, but it's so important. And then have a target operating model defined around that. Then talk about structure. Because having an underappreciation of the first two things will not lead to a great structure.
And so what's the TLDR version of the golden question, which is HR still relevant? Because we have a lot of nervous HR professionals who are still wondering whether they have a job tomorrow.
I don't think HR as a practice area is going to disappear. I think what's going to happen is, as we have started to see already, HR as a department will evolve, as it should, and roles will shift, and specialization will be the name of the game.
I think competencies and capabilities is the groundwork of what we are trying to achieve, right? First, we look at the changing business context, competencies and capabilities needed to deliver on your promise to your customers, which falls back to HR capabilities, right? As Akshat alluded to earlier. So based on HR capabilities, I think this is how we build and evolve our TOM to continuously serve our internal and external stakeholders. I would say this is my TLDR from our conversation so far.
TOM moves, man.
Right.
TOM moves.
Right, and those interested in knowing what a TOM is and finding out more about a TOM, we actually do have a very nice infographic on our website, lighthouseforhr.com, where you can check out more about our TOM and our thoughts around this.